I still remember the exact second my voice finally broke through the noise. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how staying quiet nearly erased me, until one moment forced me to speak. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And while you're listening, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether this story is hitting close to home. Growing up, I was the easy child. That's what everyone called me, at least. Easy meant I didn't complain, didn't demand attention, and didn't rock the boat. My parents, Linda and Robert, worked long hours running a small accounting firm out of our suburban Ohio town. My older brother Jason was loud, opinionated, and constantly in some kind of trouble that required saving. Dinner conversations revolved around his grades, his sports, his plans. I sat there, nodding, passing the salt, learning early that silence earned approval. At school, teachers praised my independence. At home, my parents relied on it. When Jason needed help with college applications, I waited. When money was tight, I took extra shifts at the cafe instead of asking for help. When my opinions differed, I swallowed them. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself I was strong. Looking back, I see how invisible I became without noticing. After college, I landed a steady job as a project coordinator for a logistics company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough for a small apartment and modest savings. Jason, meanwhile, bounced between jobs, always promising he'd figure things out soon. My parents worried about him endlessly. They never asked how I was doing unless I brought it up first. Even then, the conversation drifted back to Jason within minutes. That pattern followed us into adulthood. Holidays were the worst. I'd drive 3 hours to my parents' house, arms full of gifts, only to spend most of the day listening. Jason talked. My parents responded. I smiled and cleaned up dishes. Sometimes I wondered if they'd notice if I stopped coming. The thought scared me more than it should have. The moment everything shifted came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. My parents invited me over for dinner, saying they had family news. I assumed it involved Jason again. When I arrived, he was already there, sprawled comfortably on the couch. My mother looked nervous. My father avoided my eyes. That should have been my warning. They explained that Jason wanted to start a business.
He had a plan, apparently, and just needed initial support.
My parents had decided to help him financially. Then my father cleared his throat and said they also needed my help. They wanted me to co-sign a loan using my savings as backup. They said it casually, like it was obvious I would agree. I felt something crack inside me. All the years of being overlooked pressed down at once. I opened my mouth, ready to say yes out of habit. Instead, nothing came out. The room felt heavy. Jason laughed and said, "You're good for it, Em. You've always been responsible." My mother nodded, relieved. That night changed everything. For the first time, I realized they weren't asking because they respected me. They were asking because they assumed my silence meant consent. I went home shaking, replaying the conversation over and over. I didn't know it then, but that pause, that moment of hesitation, was the beginning of a different life. I just hadn't found the courage to speak yet. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time I had chosen peace over honesty. Ever felt like your own family didn't really see you? I wondered who I was without their expectations weighing on me. The next morning, I went to work exhausted but strangely alert, like something inside me had shifted. I didn't confront anyone yet. I just listened more closely, noticing how often my needs came last. That awareness was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying. For the first time, I understood that staying quiet wasn't kindness. It was self-erasure, practiced slowly over years. I promised myself I wouldn't answer them right away. I needed to decide who I wanted to be before I spoke. This moment was only the beginning, and I sensed the cost of speaking would be high, but the cost of silence had already taken too much from me. I didn't know how my family would react, but I finally knew I was done disappearing. That realization followed me into sleep, steady, frightening, and impossible to ignore. It felt like standing on a ledge, terrified but awake, no turning back. Everything after this would demand courage. The next few days felt like I was living underwater, every sound muffled, every movement slower than normal. I replayed my parents' request in my head while answering emails, attending meetings, and pretending everything was fine. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I was quietly unraveling. For years, I had defined myself as the reliable one. Now I was questioning whether that label was earned through strength or simply surrender. My mother called me the following evening. Her voice was sweet, careful. She asked if I'd thought about the loan yet. I told her I needed time. There was a pause, then a soft sigh, the kind meant to signal disappointment without saying it out loud. She reminded me how much family mattered, how we always helped each other. I said I understood and ended the call before she could push further. My hands were shaking when I set my phone down. That night, I met my friend Rachel for dinner. She'd known me since college and had witnessed my family dynamics from a distance. When I explained what my parents wanted, her expression hardened. "Emily," she said slowly, "they're not asking. They're assuming." Hearing it out loud made my chest tighten. She asked me a question no one else ever had. "What do you want?" I didn't have an answer ready. That scared me more than the loan itself. I started paying closer attention to how often I adjusted myself for others. At work, I volunteered for extra tasks without being asked. With friends, I deferred to their preferences automatically. It was a pattern so ingrained I barely noticed it before. Once I did, I couldn't stop seeing it. I realized my silence wasn't just something my family benefited from. It was something I had learned to use to avoid conflict, even when conflict was necessary. Jason texted me a few days later, casual and confident. He thanked me in advance for helping him out and joked that he'd pay me back once he was successful. There was no question mark anywhere in his message. I stared at the screen, anger rising in my throat. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before putting my phone away. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to be steady before I spoke. The pressure built quietly. My parents began dropping hints during calls, mentioning how excited Jason was, how this opportunity could change his life. They never asked how I felt about it. They talked as if the decision was already made. That's when something inside me finally settled. I understood that if I stayed silent now, I would be agreeing to a future where my needs always came second. I couldn't pretend not to see that anymore. I asked my parents to meet me for coffee that weekend. Just the 3 of us. They looked surprised but agreed. Sitting across from them at our usual cafe felt strange. I noticed details I'd ignored before. My father's habit of interrupting. My mother's tendency to speak for both of them. I waited until they finished ordering before I spoke. My voice shook at first, but I didn't stop. I told them I wasn't comfortable co-signing the loan. I explained that I had worked hard to build my savings and needed security for myself. I said I felt overlooked, taken for granted. The words tumbled out faster once I started. My mother's face fell. My father frowned, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father said I was being selfish. He reminded me of everything they'd done for me growing up. My mother said she was hurt I didn't trust them. Their reaction stung, but I stayed seated, breathing through it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I just repeated my boundary. No. Walking out of that cafe felt terrifying and empowering at the same time. I cried in my car afterward, not because I regretted it, but because it had taken me so long to get there. I didn't know how this would affect my relationship with my family. I only knew that for the first time my silence hadn't decided for me. I had chosen myself, and that choice had already begun to change everything. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet waves, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. For a few days after the cafe conversation, no one called. No texts, no follow-up. The silence felt heavy but different from before. This time, it wasn't me choosing it. It was them. I tried to tell myself that was progress, but it still hurt. Jason was the first to break it. He showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening, standing in the hallway with his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked annoyed, not nervous. "I don't get why you did that," he said as soon as I let him in. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't sit down. He just stood there like I'd inconvenienced him. I explained again calmly that I wasn't saying no to him as a person. I was saying no to risking my financial stability. He scoffed and said I was overreacting. He reminded me that family takes risks for each other. When I asked if he'd do the same for me, he hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. That pause hurt more than his tone. After he left, I felt strangely clear. Sad, yes, but clear. I realized I had spent years anticipating my family's needs while assuming mine would be ignored. Now that assumption was being confirmed, and as painful as it was also grounding. At least I wasn't imagining it anymore. My parents invited me to dinner the following Sunday. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to avoid another confrontation, but another part knew avoidance was what got me here in the first place. When I arrived, the house felt tense. My mother busied herself in the kitchen. My father sat at the table, arms crossed. Jason wasn't there. Dinner was polite but stiff. Halfway through, my father cleared his throat and said we needed to talk. He told me they were disappointed. He said they thought they'd raise me to value family above all else. My mother added that Jason was struggling and needed support. I listened without interrupting, something I'd perfected over the years. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly. I told them I did value family, but not at the cost of my own well-being. I told them I felt invisible growing up, praised for being easy but never truly seen. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked away. I didn't know if they believed me, but I knew I was done minimizing myself to keep the peace. The conversation ended without resolution. No one yelled. No one apologized. It felt unfinished, like a door left half open. Driving home, I wondered if this was what growth felt like. Uncomfortable. Lonely. Necessary. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself in ways I never had before. I stopped volunteering for extra work unless it benefited me. I said no more often, even when my voice wavered. I started therapy, something I'd always told myself I didn't need. Talking through years of quiet resentment was exhausting, but it helped me understand that my silence had been a coping mechanism, not a personality trait. Jason's business plans fell apart faster than anyone expected. Without my financial backing, my parents hesitated to fully commit. Jason blamed me openly, telling relatives I'd abandoned him. Some of them reached out, questioning my decision. For the first time, I didn't rush to explain myself. I simply said I'd made the choice that was right for me. That shift changed how people treated me. Some pulled away, others adjusted, a few even respected it. I noticed that the ones who only valued me for what I gave were the loudest when I stopped giving. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We met at a park near her house, sitting on a bench as families passed by. She admitted she hadn't realized how much pressure she'd put on me over the years. She said she'd always thought I was fine because I never complained. Hearing that made something click. I told her that being quiet didn't mean being okay. She didn't apologize outright, but it was the closest we'd come. It wasn't a perfect moment. It didn't fix everything. But it felt like movement, and after years of standing still, that mattered. I walked away knowing this story wasn't about one argument or one loan. It was about learning to take up space. And once I started, there was no going back. The real test came when things stopped being theoretical and started affecting real life in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. A month after the park conversation, my father had a minor health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to pull everyone back into the same room. I drove to the hospital with my stomach in knots, unsure what version of my family I'd walk into. Crisis has a way of resetting dynamics, or exposing them completely. Jason was already there when I arrived, pacing the hallway like the stress belonged to him alone. My mother looked exhausted, eyes red from crying. My father was resting, stable but quiet. For a moment, old habits kicked in. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to make myself useful without being seen. Instead, I took a seat and waited. That alone felt like progress. When my father woke up, he looked surprised to see me. Not upset, just surprised. That reaction stung more than anger would have. We talked about mundane things at first: work, traffic, the weather. Eventually, the conversation drifted, as it always did, toward Jason's situation. He complained about how unfair everything had been, how one missed opportunity had derailed his plans. No one interrupted him. Here's where things got complicated. My father asked me, in front of everyone, if I'd reconsider helping Jason now that things were calmer. The room went silent. I felt every eye on me, waiting for the old Emily to nod and comply. My heart raced, but my voice stayed steady. I said no. I explained, again, that my answer hadn't changed. Jason exploded. He accused me of holding grudges, of punishing him when he was already down. My mother tried to calm him, but not before throwing me a look that said, "Please just fix this." For the first time, I didn't rush to absorb that pressure. I let the discomfort sit where it belonged. I told them something I'd never said out loud before. I said I loved my family, but I wouldn't sacrifice myself to keep them comfortable anymore. I said support didn't have to mean financial risk. I said being related didn't entitle anyone to my silence. My father listened without interrupting. That alone felt significant. Later that evening, my father asked me to stay behind after everyone else left. We sat in the dim hospital room, the steady beep of machines filling the space between us. He admitted he'd leaned on me because I was dependable, because I never pushed back. He said he hadn't realized that dependability came at a cost. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And for us, that was something. The weeks after were quieter. Jason stopped calling altogether. My mother checked in more, asking how I was instead of assuming. My father made an effort to include me in conversations without talking over me. It wasn't perfect. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But the balance had shifted. I started noticing changes in myself too. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head before they happened. Therapy helped me understand that boundaries weren't walls. They were filters. They let in what was healthy and kept out what wasn't. That idea changed how I moved through the world. One evening, I got a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me she'd heard about the situation and wanted to say she admired how I handled it. That message caught me off guard. For so long, I'd assumed speaking up would only cost me relationships. I hadn't considered what it might give me. Looking back, I see that my family didn't suddenly become villains or heroes. They were flawed people reacting to change. The real transformation happened inside me. I learned that being quiet isn't the same as being kind, and peace kept at your own expense isn't peace at all. I didn't know exactly how this story would end yet, but I finally trusted myself to face whatever came next without disappearing. By the time winter arrived, the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming felt undeniable, not dramatic. Not sudden, just steady like a tide that had finally turned. I noticed it in small moments. The way I answered the phone without bracing myself. The way I spoke at work without softening my opinions. The way I no longer felt responsible for managing everyone else's emotions before my own. The holidays approached with their usual weight. This time, I considered not going home at all. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I wanted to choose, not default. When my mother called and invited me for Christmas dinner, she added something new. "Only if you want to," she said. That sentence mattered more than she knew. I decided to go, but with boundaries clear in my mind. I wouldn't stay silent to keep things smooth. I wouldn't stay if it felt wrong. Walking into my childhood home felt strange, like visiting a place that no longer defined me. Jason was there, quieter than I'd ever seen him. He nodded at me, said hello, and that was it, no accusations. No jokes, just distance. Dinner was awkward but civil. Conversations didn't revolve around Jason's plans anymore. My parents asked about my job. My apartment, my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And different was enough. Later that evening, my father pulled me aside. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about our conversations over the past year. He admitted he'd confused compliance with contentment. He said he was proud of me, not for being easy, but for being honest. Hearing that felt like exhaling after holding my breath for decades. It didn't erase the past, but it softened it. Jason left early without much explanation. A few days later, he sent me a message. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an attack either.
He said he was trying to figure things out on his own. I wished him well, genuinely.
I didn't offer to fix anything. And I didn't feel guilty about that. As the year ended, I reflected on how much had changed without any dramatic showdown or perfect resolution. Speaking up hadn't transformed my family overnight. It had transformed me. I learned that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. Sometimes it just means you've taught people how to treat you by staying quiet too long. Therapy helped me put words to something I'd always felt but never understood. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're instructions. They tell people how to love you properly. Some will listen. Some won't. Either way, you get to keep your voice. I thought back to the night I almost said yes to that loan out of habit. How close I came to repeating the same pattern. That pause, that moment of hesitation had changed the direction of my life. Ever felt like one small decision carried more weight than it should? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's the first honest choice you've ever made. My relationship with my family is still evolving. There are good days and uncomfortable ones, but I no longer feel invisible in the room. And when I do, I speak. That's the difference. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Silence can look like peace, but it often hides resentment. Real peace comes from being seen, even when that visibility costs you comfort. Especially then. They thought I'd stay quiet. For a long time I did. But finding my voice didn't destroy my family the way I feared. It revealed what needed to change. And in that honesty, I found something I'd never had before. Respect. From others, yes. But more importantly, from myself. Family should be about love, not control. And the moment I understood that, everything truly changed.